The mitzvah of Sfiras Omer regarding which were commanded in this parsha is Fartem Lechem Yimachras HaShabbos. You have to count from the day after the first day of Yom Tif, from the time the Omer is brought until after 7 weeks. Count 50 days. So the idea of Sfiras Omer, as Mefarshim and Poskim explain, it's a hachon, it's a preparation for Chag HaShavuos, for Zman Matan Torah Seinu. Or as the Chinuch puts it, that we're commanded to count from the day after Yom Tov of Pesach until the day of the giving of the Torah to show inside of ourselves the tremendous desire that we have for this very, very important day. Like a slave that's looking forward for some time of rest, relaxation, he's always counting to the time when he'll be able to go out free already. In a similar way is over here, because the counting shows that a person is really excited about something, looking forward to get to something, and in this case, that's what Sfira is about, a preparation looking forward to Matan Torah. This idea of Sfiras Omer is also relevant in Halacha. This idea is brought in some poskim as one of the reasons why we actually don't make a special Shecheyanu for the mitzvah of Sfiras Omer, as in the footnotes the Rebbe elaborates more on this point. Nevertheless, we see that the mitzvah of Sfiras Omer is a mitzvah for itself. First of all, a mitzvah b'shleimus, obviously in the time of the Beis HaMikdash in a more perfect way, but also these days, it's a mitzvah. Different opinions about it, whether it's midoraisa, whether it's midrabanan, whether it's zeichel mikdash. But the point is we make a bracha on it, and furthermore we make it every single day, and in fact it's as a result of the Sfiras Omer that each and every yid has individually to count, as it says, Usfartem lochem, from which we learn out that every single individual has to count. It's not on Basin to count, but the individual counts. This is what causes it the 50th day of the Omer, is Chag HaShavuos. Says the Rebbe, based on this understanding of the Geder of Sfiras Omer, again, that on the one hand, it's about looking forward and preparing for Shavuos, but it's also a mitzvah in its own right. Says the Rebbe, we can explain the reason why the Alter Rebbe put in Sfiras Omer at the very end of his Siddur. Generally, it's known the tremendous precision with which the Alter Rebbe did everything in all of his matters. Especially in the Seder Tefillah, which is a Seder Tefillah is Mukal Hashon, it's the order of davening for the whole year. It's understood that the Seder, the order, would be very precise and very, very accurate. In fact, in the footnotes over here again, the Rebbe elaborates on a number of points of the accuracy, first of all, of how the Alter Rebbe chose the Siddur from so many different, 60 different Siddurim, and things that the Rebbe Rashab said about the accuracy of the Alter Rebbe Siddur, etc. The Rebbe says this diuk, the particular order that Sfiras Omer is all the way at the end, is even more seen when we contrast it with the order in the Siddur HaArizal, which we know that the Alter Rebbe Siddur is based on the Nusach of the Arizal. Says the Rebbe in the Siddur HaArizal that I saw, the siyum, the end of the Siddur, is not with Sfiras Omer, rather it is with the Kavonos of Shmini Atzeres, Simchas Torah. Says the Rebbe, simply we could say the reason why the Alter Rebbe changed in his Siddur from the Seder of the Siddur HaArizal is because the Alter Rebbe Siddur, as it's known, is what's called Shava L'chol Nefesh. It applies to everyone equally. Not like the Siddur HaArizal, which is for Yechidei Gula, for select individuals. It's known that this is also the reason why the Alter Rebbe did not put into his Siddur all of the Kavonos that the Arizal has in his Siddur. Says the Rebbe, this is why the order of the Alter Rebbe Siddur goes in the order of what we call Tadir, that which comes more frequent, more often, is going to come before the things that are not as often. And within the things that don't happen so often, those mitzvahs that happen, those things that happen, for example, once a year, those are the things that are going to be later on in the Siddur, and within them themselves, they'll be according to the order of the year. So we have Chanukah, Purim, say the Korban Pesach, Haggadah Shel Pesach, and finally Sfiras Omer. So that's the simple reason why Sfiras Omer would come by the end. However, says the Rebbe, since we again know that the Alter Rebbe wrote his Siddur in accordance to both the opinion of the Poskim and Halacha, at the same time he also clarified the Nusach according to the Kavonos HaArizal. It's only that he didn't quote the Soidos and the Kavonos, the esoteric and the deeper meanings of Kabbalah, he didn't quote, so that it should be able to be equally applied to everyone. Everyone should be able to use it. Even those that can't actually think the Soidos, those Kavonos. But everything in the Siddur is based on, going according to the Kabbalah and the Pnimiyus HaTorah of it. So it's understood that the order in the Siddur is not only because of what simply makes sense, Al Pi Pashtus or Yonim, just simply the simple order, but also based on the content of what it's all about, both according to Nigla as well as according to Pnimiyus Yonim. Says the Rebbe, based on this, we could say that the reason Sfiras Omer comes at the very, very end of the Siddur is because it's in the mitzvah of Sfiras Omer that we specifically see, in a very emphasized way, the main point of what davening is all about. Both al pi nigla and al pi soid, as we will soon see. In other words, the Rebbe is going to explain a number of things, how Sfiras Omer in many ways highlights and brings out what the main points of davening are all about. Says the Rebbe, this idea that Sfiras Omer is something very, very unique and special, and it symbolizes what davening is all about, is both in regards to the cheftza, so to speak, in other words, the object, the davening itself, and Sfiras Omer, davening and Sfiras Omer, as well as the person who is davening or saying Sfiras Omer, as we will discuss soon at length. So again, the Rebbe is going to show us a number of common themes between these two, Sfiras Omer and the Siddur, and this is why the Alter Rebbe puts it all the way at the end, as we shall see. The mitzvah of davening, says the Rebbe, is as the Rambam puts it, mitzvah sa'asele is spalel b'chol yom, it's a mitzvah to daven every single day. As it says, va'avadetem es Hashem elekeichem. Mepi Shmuel Lamdu was passed down to us by tradition all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu, that what does avoida mean? This avoida, when it says va'avadetem, means tefillah, it means davening. As it says, the Chachamim say, what is considered the avodah shabalev? What is the service of the heart? That's tefillah. In another place, the Rambam describes this mitzvah to say, la avodas Hashem, to serve Hashem every single day in tefillah. One of the biurim, one of the explanations according to Nigla, that tefillah is a concept of avodah shabalev. So we could see from the wording of the Rambam itself how the Rambam explains it. The Rambam says the obligation of this mitzvah is that a person should be mischaneni, should be begging, pleading, davening every single day, saying the praise of Hashem, then asking for his own personal needs that he needs, with again a way of a request and pleading, and then he thanks Hashem and praises Hashem for all the good that Hashem has given us. So to explain this point a little further, generally we know mitzvahs could be grouped into two separate categories. There are the mitzvahs in which we do something, whether it's an actual physical action, like putting on tzitzis, putting on tefillin, etc., or at least verbalizing, saying something, which is also considered an action, a small action, whether it's Kriyas HaMegillah, telling the story of Yitzias Mitzrayim, etc. And in both of these, the mitzvah is, again, either the action, or in this case, the mitzvah is going to be the verbalizing and saying the words and so on. So that's all in one group, one category. And then we have the mitzvahs that are called chayvas halavavis, things that are more associated with our emotions. Avas Hashem, yiras Hashem, love of Hashem, fear of Hashem, etc. Which is more about the kavanah, the intent, the feeling of the person in his mind, in his heart, and so on. And what about davening? Says the Rebbe, davening is unique. On the one hand, davening must be bedibur. It must be, you need to verbalize the words, you need to say the words. But what is the action of davening? What is the mitzvah? The mitzvah is that the person should be begging, pleading, davening every single day. This idea of begging, of pleading, is more of an avodah, more of a feeling in the heart of the person. It's not an action, it's not a speech, it's more about the feelings of the person. Says the Rebbe, even though it's true that in a number of mitzvahs, the halacha would be that in a mitzvah shel Torah you need to have kavanah to be yoytze yidei chayvasei, to be yoytze the mitzvah as you're doing the mitzvah. And if you're missing the kavanah, you're not going to be yoytze min haTorah. However, says the Rebbe, in those cases it's only an aspect of the kavanah of the mitzvah. In other words, you have the mitzvah, and the mitzvah needs to have kavanah, but it's not part of the mitzvah itself. Whereas by davening, the whole concept of davening, the whole chefza, the idea, the item of davening, of the action of davening, is to be mischanen and mispal, to be davening, pleading, begging by Hashem and davening. In other words, it's all really about kavanas halev. As the Rambam puts it afterwards, and then you ask your needs, that you need, bevakosha ubetchina, with begging, with pleading. Now, in order to do this, as the Rambam again says, you need to empty your mind, you need to empty your heart from all sorts of thoughts, you need to see as if you're standing in front of the Shekhinah. So in other words, it's very, very much a matter of your kavanis inside your heart. And then during davening, it has to be, as we said, the bakasha and tchina. And without that, it's not only that you weren't yoitza the obligation of the mitzvah. It's more like saying the object of the mitzvah wasn't there. You were saying the words, but those words are not considered tefillah. So again, a major difference between other mitzvahs is that in the other mitzvahs you did the mitzvah, or you said the words, and that was the mitzvah, and the question is whether you had kavanah. In davening, what we're saying is, davening, the object of davening is mainly a mitzvah of the heart. It needs to be verbalized. But without having the heart, without having those feelings, it's not tefillah. Says the Rebbe, this idea in tefillah, that it's specifically the knowledge of what you're doing, the kavanah in what you're doing, is what's making up the mitzvah of tefillah. And without that, it's not going to be tefillah. Says the Rebbe, this is, we see clearly in the idea of Sfiras Omer. The Alter Rebbe paskins, one is allowed to count in any language that he understands, but if you don't understand the language in which you're counting, even if you say in a Lashon Kodesh, if you didn't understand it, you're not Yoitza. The Alter Rebbe says, because if you don't know the number that you're counting, Ein Zu Sfira Klal, it's just simply not considered counting. Counting is when you know what you're counting. So in other words, here too, by the mitzvah of Sfira, it's not about saying the words with my mouth, verbalizing the words, even though yes, it does have to be done verbally. You do have to say it. But the main point of the sphira is the knowledge of the person. And without that knowledge, without that thought, without the intent of the person, it's not only that you were yoitza sphira, but it's not called sphira. You didn't do sphira at all. Similar to what we said regarding davening. So this is the first idea that the Rebbe is showing how sphira really brings out very much the idea of how davening works. The Rebbe now moves on with the next point. Since the whole idea of davening is being created through the kavanah, through the avodah of the person, it's understood that first and foremost, the change, the difference that happens is, number one has to happen is inside the person himself. Has to happen as a result of his davening and his introductions to it and so on. Here too, says the Rebbe, we're going to see a common denominator between tefillah and sfiras omer. In other words, not only again in the item or the object of davening, but in the person, in the effect on the person. So starting with tefillah, which mainly is tefillah so'amida, shmoina esrei, is where a yid is standing, he's setting himself up and standing ka'avda ka'mamori, like a servant, like a slave in front of his master, in front of Hashem, as the halach is that he needs to see himself stand like he's standing in front of the Shekhinah, and then he goes ahead and mischanenu, mispalel, that's when you become a metzius, an entity of a mispalel. In other words, you became a davener. You set yourself up, you changed your mindset and so on and so forth, you now become a person that's davening. When a person is emptying his heart of all of these thoughts and he's being mischanen and mispalel to the Eibishter, with that itself he's being changed, he's being elevated from his previous state. In other words, right now he's standing in a completely different place, so to speak, in a different mindset, in a different state of mind. And there's a change in a chidush within the person himself. Says the Rebbe, here again we see this specifically in the idea of Sfiras Omer. That every single yid says, in his tefillah, simply he says it just after counting the Sfira, every single yid says every night, you Hashem commanded us to count the Sfiras Omer. And the purpose of it is, to purify us from our klipa, from our tumah. As you wrote in your Torah, and we continue with the psukim, and the point is that the souls of the Yidden should become purified from their filth and so on. So here again we see that the whole point of davening, which is to elevate the Yid, in Sfiras Omer, once again we see this idea that the purpose of Sfiras Omer is going to be to elevate, to purify, the Yid should become in a different way than he was before. Says the Rebbe, all of this that we spoke about so far is both as far as the pu'ula, the act of the person, and the avoid of the person, in both in tefillah and in Sfiras Omer. But now the Rebbe says there's another idea in which tefillah is unique from all other mitzvahs, and here again we're going to see it by Sfiras Omer. And that is, what are we achieving, what are we trying to get through the tefillah? That is, most mitzvahs, the main point of the mitzvah is doing the action of the mitzvah. You do it with the kavanah, you did it b'shleimus, you did it perfectly, but basically with that, as far as the person is concerned, is the end of the mitzvah. He did what he was supposed to do. When it comes to mitzvah of tefillah, it's different. On the one hand, what's the idea of tefillah? You're davening, you're begging for something, you're asking Hashem for your needs, bevakasho v'tchina, that the Eibishter should fulfill your requests. In other words, It's not a separate thing outside of the davening. That's the point of davening. The point of davening is you're asking Hashem that your request should be fulfilled. But this aspect of Hashem fulfilling your requests, that's not how the mitzvah of tefillah is being fulfilled. In other words, you did the mitzvah of tefillah, it's nothing to do at all with whether your requests were fulfilled or not. In other words, when you did your part, the tachanunim and the tefillah of the person, you did your mitzvah of tefillah b'shleimus. There's also this aspect that Hashem should fulfill your requests. But although it wasn't fulfilled, or before it was fulfilled, at that point, you did all your whole mitzvah. Says the Rebbe, the same thing is with Sfiras Omer. Sfiras Omer, as we mentioned already in the beginning of the Sicha, is a mitzvah that's a preparation for Shavuos, for Matan Torah, as we said before. Especially according to the way the Zohar explains it, that the counting of the 7 weeks is like the counting of the 7 clean days of a woman that's tamei, and through that the Yidden are purifying themselves to go into the chuppah with Hashem, so to speak, by Matan Torah on Chag HaShavuos. So that's on the one hand, it's all about a preparation for something else. But on the other hand, the Sfira now becomes an inyan and a mitzvah for itself, with a separate bracha, a separate amshacha for itself. In other words, this yearning, this for Matan Torah, and this preparation itself becomes something in it of itself, and is something so important. And as we said before, it ends up purifying the Yid from all of his filth. This all emphasizes the idea of the maila, of the avoid of the person on its own. In other words, even before the results later come and all of that. So again, here we see the tefillah and Sfiras Omer bringing out this same idea that it's all about what you did in your avoid. What happens afterwards is another stage. So the Rebbe now comes back with the idea of the difference between the Arizal Siddur and the Alter Rebbe Siddur. Even though we said the Alter Rebbe is, of course, it's all based on the Nusach of the Arizal, and nevertheless we say that there's going to be certain differences. And the Rebbe says, first of all, the difference is seen right away in the beginning of the Siddurim. The Siddur Arizal starts off with Klalus Tikkun V'Aliyas Olam, is the whole general idea of how to fix and elevate all the worlds. The Alter Rebbe Siddur starts with Mudazois Mailas Kimas Chatzois Lailo. It's known the tremendous advantage of getting up at midnight. A person needs to try to get up at midnight whenever he can to be part of Avdei Hashem, a servant of Hashem, etc. What's the difference between these two approaches or these two beginnings? According to Pnimi Yisrael Yonim, as it's brought out in Siddur HaArizal, which is for Yechidei Sgula, for selecting the individuals, those that could be mechaven to all the different kavanos in Yechudim. If for these people, the idea of tefillah is not only about the person's avoid and the person going up and being elevated, but it's also about the purpose of what's going to be achieved as a result of the tefillah. As a result of the tefillah, there will be the tikkun, the fixing up, and the aliyah, the elevation of the oilamos, which in turn, of course, will then be the source which will bring down into our world all of the ruchnis, the gashmis, the things that are needed, roifei cholim, healing the sick, mevarech hashanim, giving blessings to the ears, parnasa, etc. So in the Siddur HaArizal, there is a focus also on what's happening as a result of the davening in the higher oilamos, and then down here. And therefore, Sfiras Omer, which is more about the avodah of the person, doesn't come at the end of the Siddur. It doesn't come as the ending, in other words, the ultimate goal and purpose. It comes earlier. But after Sfiras Omer, we still have the tefillas and the kavanos of the Sholosh Regalim, and Rosh Hashanah, and Yom Kippur, and Shmini Atzeres, and Simchas Torah, which is all about the shleimus in those hamshachas. In other words, all of these great hamshachas that are happening, coming down from above, being drawn down below, as a result of the inyanim that we did in the Siddur and in our tefillos. Whereas in the Siddur of the Alter Rebbe, which again was written specifically in a way that's shavu l'chol nefesh, that applies equally to everyone, the soidos, the secrets, the kavanos are not standing out there in an open way. The order over here was set up in a way that the idea of tefillah emphasizes the avodah of the person. As discussed previously at length, that both the object of davening, as well as the fact that the person is also being elevated, but it's all about the person's avodah. It's not about things, it's not about the hamshachas that are coming down from above. Says the Rebbe, for this reason, the first thing we have right in the beginning of the Siddur is emphasizing the advantage, the great quality of getting up by Chatzos. Through that you become one of the Avdei Hashem, a servant of Hashem. And therefore also the ending of the Siddur is not with the tfilos, which are about the Kedushas HaChag, bringing down the holiness of the Yom Tov, etc., but it's about your avodah, the avodah of Sfiras HaOmer, which is all about the act, the activity, and the avodah of the person in all of the above-mentioned points, as we said. Now, based on all of this, one might think that the avodah of every individual yid, especially an avodah that's only about counting the days, does not have the ability, is not so powerful to be able to have an impact on the world, the tikkun olam is that we spoke about before. Comes Sfiras HaOmer and emphasizes that in fact over here we see the pu'ula, the effect of avodah, even more than in any other avodah. How so? Generally we know that Yom Tov is dependent on Bnei Yisrael. They are the ones that make the time holy. They're the ones that Mekadosh the Chodesh, sanctify the moon, and as a result of that, Yom Tov, etc. But usually that's all done with a Beis Din specifically. The Beis Din is the one that's Mekadosh the Chodesh. In other words, it's more about Klal Yisrael rather than the individual. The fact that the Yidden are davening throughout the Shalosh Regalim, this is as a result and an additional point to the Kedusha of Yom Tov. But the Kedusha of Yom Tov is there already based on the Beis Din. So too Shabbos, even more so, Mekadosh v'Kayim is just holy by itself. The Yidden, through their avodah, are going to add something by making it holier through their kiddush and tfilos, etc. But by Sfiras HaOmer we see that through the counting of every individual, as we said before, it's not based on counting, the individual has to count. This is what brings about Chag HaShavuos. It's not dependent on the kviyus of Rosh Chodesh, because Shavuos is not a particular day in Sivan. It could sometimes be Hey, it could sometimes be Vav, it could sometimes be Zayin at the time when we're being Mekadosh based on the moon. Rather, it's just the 50th day of the Omer, according to our count. In fact, says the Rebbe, in some aspects, for example, in regards to the strictness of the second day of Yom Tov Sheni Shel Goliath, in some way, Chag HaShavuos, the stringency of Chag HaShavuos is much more than in other Yom Tovim, because in other Yom Tovim, the second day is because of a doubt. We're not sure, is it this day of the month, the other day of the month? In Shavuos, we don't have that. So Shavuos, we have a second day of Yom Tov, but it has the power of a Vaday. In other words, we are sanctifying it or making it holy based on our Sfiras HaOmer. We're now saying we're going to have that first day Yom Tov, and we're still having the second day Yom Tov as well. So in a certain way, it's even more powerful. It's more strict to the second day of Yom Tov of Shavuos. And again, this is all emphasizing the power of the avodah of Sfiras HaOmer, that which the Yid counted. Says the Rebbe, this is what's being madgish, what's emphasizing the general mila of the person's avodah in davening. Because what's davening all about? It's not only about drawing down into the world that which was already up in its root and in its source. The idea of davening is, the chiddush of davening, we say in davening, yehi rotzoin. We're, so to speak, of Ayochel creating or making a new rotzoin up above that wasn't even in the source, wasn't even in the root. In other words, we're asking for things that maybe l'mayla, it's not even there. We're asking yehi rotzoin. May it be the will of Hashem that these brachas should come about. And then it's going to come down in the world and actually change the way the world is. Whether a person that was sick is becoming healed, whether the rain is coming down and now producing all the plants and so on and so forth. Whereas in Torah and mitzvahs generally, we don't have that the parchment of the tefillin changed because you put it on your head and you did a mitzvah with it, as explained in Tanya. So just like in Sfiras HaOmer, we're saying that it's the Yid's power and his avodah to actually change, to make this day a holy day of Yom Tov, it's again specifically in tefillah more than anything else that we are creating and making a new rotzen by Hashem kavayachol to draw down new brachas and amshachis into our world. So up until this point, the Rebbe gave a number of similarities and explanations how Sfiras HaOmer is so similar and bringing out, emphasizing the idea of tefillah. The Rebbe says, according to the way the Alter Rebbe himself explains the idea of tefillah, b'pnimiyus and al-pi chassidus, we're going to understand even more the connection between tefillah and Sfiras HaOmer. And again, going in accordance to that which we were talking about before. The Alter Rebbe explains in L'Kutei Torah that tefillah is not counted as one of the Taryag mitzvahs, because tefillah is really the kavanah of all of Torah and mitzvahs. In other words, it's the whole point, really, about what's happening in all of Torah and mitzvahs. It is the pillar that holds up all of the Taryag mitzvahs. It's like the chut hashed, it's like the spinal cord for the rest of the body. What's the idea of tefillah? The main point of tefillah is that level of the Oirein Soif Baruch Hu, which is completely higher than Ishtalshalos. It's what we call a love. We daven directly to Hashem and not to His midos. Directly to Hashem, the way Hashem is beyond everything. And yet this should be drawn down into our world, into Seder Ishtalshalos. And then in the 18 brachos of Shmoneh Esrei, which are like the kelim, the containers to have this oir, it's to bring this oir in a particular place, whether to be roifeh cholim or mevarich hashanim, etc. So this is what davening is all about, bringing down this most general oir of Hashem and bringing it down into our world. Says the Rebbe Via Shloimar that this idea is again even more emphasized, and we see this specifically by Sfiras Omer. Again, every individual says in the Ribono Shel Olam right after Sfiras Omer, as a result of our Sfira, the oir of Hashem is going to come down into all of the worlds, like we said by davening, that there's this most general hamshach of the oir ein soif that's happening. And then we continue with a vav, and also, ulesakin es nafshay seinu. In other words, on the one hand, there's a very tremendous hamshach coming down to the whole world, but then it goes into details to correct our nefesh, our ruach, our neshama from any sort of blemish, from any sort of filth, and so on. In other words, we're taking this tremendous hashpah that's coming from above, but it's also going to go down into the details, into the kelim, to change the individual nivroim, like we just discussed about davening. The Rebbe concludes, through being oisik in the halachas of Sfiras Omer, and speaking about the inyanim of Sfiras Omer, through fulfilling the mitzvah of Sfiras Omer and perfectly, bezman hazeh, which is a zeichel the mikdash, including also being involved in the halachas of Sfiras Omer, both in Nigla and Pnimis HaTorah, this will hasten the fulfillment of the tefillah that we say right after Sfiras Omer. The yachzer lano avodas beis hamikdash l'mkoyim, Hashem will bring back the avodas beis hamikdash in its place. We'll be able to do the mitzvah in its most perfect way. B'meherav yameinu mamish, amen selah.